Say it again. He laughed into the microphone. Tell everyone what she does for a living. The room exploded. I felt my sister's hand slip from mine. No explanation and defense. Just the sound of people enjoying my humiliation like it was part of the entertainment package. I stood there, smiling, nodding, invisible, while the man she was about to marry turned me into a joke I didn't consent to. What none of them understood in that moment was that the joke had already expired. I didn't need to look around to know what they were thinking. She doesn't belong here. The engagement party glowed with polished confidence, tailored suits, practiced laughter, the kind of room where everyone spoke in job titles and stock options. Coworkers hugged like insiders. Executives nodded like judges. And me? I hovered at the edge of it all, dressed simply, holding a glass I hadn't touched. They assumed I was just the sister, the one who never quite figured it out. What they didn't know, what no one in that room could have guessed, was that the company funding the champagne, signing the checks, and employing half the guests answered to me. Quietly. Completely. My name is Naomi Carter. And this engagement party was happening inside a system I built from the ground up. I grew up learning how to disappear. My sister, Lydia, had always been effortless, the kind of person rooms leaned toward. Teachers adored her. Relatives bragged about her. Even strangers seemed to agree she was meant for more. I learned early that I wasn't. So while she was celebrated, I adapted. While she was protected, I prepared. When our parents died, she stayed surrounded by family. I learned how to stand alone. I left without drama. No speeches. No tears. Just work. Long nights. Failing companies. Contracts no one else wanted to read. Systems no one bothered to understand. And somewhere along the way, invisibility became my advantage. By the time success found me, I had learned not to announce it. People treat you differently when they think you need them. So I made sure they never knew they needed me. That included my family, especially my family. When the invitation to Lydia's engagement arrived, part of me almost declined. Not out of fear, but habit. Hope is dangerous when it's been disappointed too many times. But I came anyway. I told myself I was here to celebrate her, to be supportive, to keep the peace. Standing there now, listening to laughter rise at my expense, I realized something else. They thought tonight was about love. They had no idea it was about to become a lesson in perception. And I wasn't done watching yet. They had no idea it was about to become a lesson in perception, and I wasn't done watching yet. Welcome back to Her Value Stories, where every story is a reminder that love, loss, and resilience visit us all, no matter where we come from or what we carry. We may never know when life will change, or why certain hearts are tested, but every moment holds meaning worth telling. If you're new here, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. And to our returning hearts, thank you. Your presence is what gives these stories their voice. Stay with us until the very end. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. Now, let us continue. Lydia had always shined, not in a way that demanded effort or even intention. She simply existed, and people adjusted themselves around her. Teachers leaned forward when she spoke. Relatives softened when she entered a room. Strangers remembered her name after hearing it once. And then there was me. I learned early that rooms didn't bend for everyone. When we were children, the difference between us was never spoken out loud, but it was always understood. Lydia was the story people wanted to tell. I was the footnote they skipped over when time ran short. At school assemblies, Lydia stood in the front row with the other special kids, award ribbons pinned to her dress, her smile bright and easy. I sat somewhere in the middle, clapping just as hard, shrinking just a little more each time the applause wasn't for me. At home, it was quieter. Worse, somehow. Our parents loved us. I know that now. In the way adults love imperfectly, filtered through their own wounds and expectations. But love doesn't land the same when it's distributed unevenly. Lydia needed reassurance. She got it in abundance that I needed acknowledgement. I learned not to ask. When Lydia cried, the house paused. When I struggled, the house continued. If she brought home a B, it was proof she was doing her best. If I brought home an A dash, it was followed by a question. What happened to the rest? Nobody said it outright, but the message was consistent. Lydia was the promise. I was the contingency plan. I became very good at being low dash maintenance, AT not taking up space, AT excelling quietly so no one felt threatened or inconvenienced. That was the beginning of my education. By the time we were teenagers, the pattern had hardened into something permanent. Lydia was invited everywhere. I was included when it was convenient. Family friends asked about her future, her dreams, her potential. When they turned to me, it was usually with a polite, distracted smile. So, what about you? I never knew how to answer that question in a way that made them stay interested. When our parents died, 3 years apart, grief rearranged the household, but not the hierarchy. Lydia was wrapped in concern, guided through it, protected from the sharpest edges of loss. I became functional. I handled paperwork. I made calls. I learned how to survive without being asked how I was doing. People assumed I was strong. What they meant was convenient. After the funerals, Lydia stayed close to extended family. She leaned into familiarity, into comfort. I felt something else pull at me, distance maybe. Or clarity. I left. Not in a dramatic way. No slammed doors, no ultimatums. I packed my things, took a job in a city that didn't know my name, and learned how to build a life where no one expected anything from me except results. Independence didn't come wrapped in freedom. IT came wrapped in exhaustion. I worked jobs that didn't care how tired I was. I learned quickly, not because I was gifted, but because failure had become too expensive to entertain. I stopped waiting for permission, stopped waiting for praise. I discovered something important in those years. When you remove the expectation of approval, you become frighteningly efficient. Lydia visited once, early on. She looked around my small apartment, smiled tightly, and said, "It's cozy." She didn't mean it as an insult. She didn't mean it as anything at all. That was the problem. She left with a hug and the quiet confidence of someone who knew she was doing better than me. And for a long time, she was right. Her life unfolded exactly the way it was supposed to. College, friends, a social orbit that kept expanding. She met Evan through work, and suddenly her world was filled with dinners, events, and people who spoke the same polished language she did. From the outside, it looked like success. From my side, it looked like inevitability. The engagement was treated like a coronation. Calls came in waves. Texts filled with exclamation points. Family members who hadn't checked in on me for years suddenly remembered my number to make sure I'd be attending. "This is such a big moment for Lydia," they said. "She's finally getting everything she deserves." Finally. The word stuck with me, as if life had been withholding something from her all this time and was now correcting the mistake. No one asked what I deserved that I didn't expect them to. When the invitation arrived, I stared at it longer than I needed to. Not because I didn't want to go, but because some part of me still hoped that if I showed up, something would be different. That I wouldn't feel 12 years old again. That I wouldn't feel like the extra piece in a story already complete without me. Standing in that engagement party now, watching Lydia laugh easily beside Evan, I saw it clearly. This was her moment. The final confirmation. The proof that the narrative everyone believed about her and about me had been right all along. She had risen, just as expected I had hovered. That's what they thought, anyway. And here's the part one never say out loud, the part that doesn't make me look generous or evolved. A small, quiet part of me wanted her to look at me differently. Not with pity, not with dismissal. Just once, with curiosity. To wonder, even briefly, if she had missed something. That longing sat side by side with resentment, neither canceling the other out. I carried both with practiced ease. You learn to do that when you grow up second. So I stood there, holding my untouched drink, letting the room tell its story about who mattered and who didn't. I watched Lydia glow under a tension that felt as natural to her as breathing. And I let myself feel everything I had spent years pretending I didn't. Because endurance isn't the absence of pain. It's learning how to live with it long enough for it to change shape. And somewhere between the laughter and the clinking glasses, I realized something else. This story, the one they were so sure they understood, was missing a chapter. And I was finally ready to let it be read. I didn't rise in a straight line. There were no grand moments, no applause, no single day where everything changed. Just a long sequence of quiet decisions made when no one was watching, and a refusal to stop once I'd started. My first real job didn't come with a title worth remembering. I was an analyst in name only, buried under spreadsheets no one wanted to read. The kind of work people passed off because it was tedious, because it didn't shine. That's where I lived, inside the margins, inside the details. I learned how money moved when people weren't paying attention. I learned how systems failed, how egos blinded, how leverage hid in plain sight. I stayed late. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I wanted to understand everything. I asked questions people found annoying. I noticed patterns others dismissed. When a struggling company needed someone to clean up its mess quietly, my name started coming up, not loudly, just enough. Sleep became optional. Weekends became theoretical. Friends drifted. I missed birthdays, holidays, entire seasons. There were nights I slept on office couches, and mornings I went straight back into meetings with eyes that burned from lack of rest. But every sacrifice bought me something more valuable than comfort. Clarity. When the opportunity came, it didn't arrive dressed as a miracle. It arrived as a problem no one else wanted. A failing division. A bad deal. A risk everyone warned me against. I took it anyway. Then another. Then another. Ownership didn't happen all at once, it accumulated. By the time people started noticing the company's stability, my name was already buried deep in the structure. I kept it that way on purpose. Power changes rooms. Silence lets you observe them. Inside the company, only a handful of people knew who actually signed the final decisions. I didn't attend holiday parties. I didn't put my face on press releases. I let others stand in front while I built behind them. It wasn't humility. It was strategy. And my family? They never knew. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I wanted peace, control, protection. I didn't want expectations rewritten overnight. I didn't want my worth renegotiated once success became undeniable. I had already lived that version of approval, and I didn't trust it. So I stayed quiet. Which is how my sister's fiancé came to work for a company he never realized I owned. How his friends built careers off systems I designed. How their bonuses, their promotions, their sense of stability traced back to decisions I made in silence. They toasted their futures in a room funded by my past. And I stood there, unrecognized, watching the ironies settle into place. True power doesn't announce itself. It waits. At first, it was easy to miss. Laughter covered everything, the way expensive perfume covers nervous sweat. Music swelled at the right moments. Glasses stayed full. From the outside, the room looked exactly like a celebration should. But I had spent too many years studying systems to believe appearances. I started noticing the small things. A cluster of Evan's coworkers huddled near the bar, voices low, smiles practiced. One of them checked his phone again and again, thumb hovering like he was waiting for bad news. Another joked too loudly about surviving the next quarter, the laugh landing half a second too late. Office humor, the kind that only appears when people are afraid. I drifted closer without appearing to listen. Phrases floated past me, restructuring, realignment, cost controls. Words that sound harmless until you know what they usually precede. Across the room, a woman I recognized from upper management whispered something to her partner and tightened her grip on her champagne glass. A man in a tailored suit nodded too quickly, his confidence slipping just enough to be noticeable. They were nervous, and they had no idea why. Evan, meanwhile, was thriving on the surface. He moved through the room like someone who believed he was untouchable, laughing loudly, clapping shoulders, accepting congratulations as if they were owed to him. He spoke about the future with careless certainty. Promotions, growth, stability. But every so often, when he thought no one was watching, his jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward the exits. He drank faster than celebration required. Arrogance and fear share the same heartbeat. Lydia found me near the edge of the dance floor, her smile already strained. "You've been awfully quiet," she said, glancing past me as if hoping someone more interesting might appear. "I'm just observing," I replied. She frowned slightly. "Try to enjoy yourself. This isn't the time to be whatever this is." There it was. Not cruelty, dismissal. The final, familiar cut. I nodded because that was what I had always done. Let the moment pass. Let myself pass with it. But something had shifted. I could feel it now, the way you feel a storm before it breaks. The room wasn't just celebrating, it was bracing. Everyone sensed something coming, even if they couldn't name it yet. And I understood, with sudden clarity, that timing mattered more than intent. What I knew had the power to collapse more than an engagement. Careers. Identities. Beliefs. This wasn't a moment to be emotional. It was a moment to be precise. I looked around the room one last time. The laughter, the confidence, the assumptions. They thought tonight was a celebration. I realized it was a reckoning. The music softened, forks paused midair, conversations faded into a low, anticipatory hum. Someone clinked a glass. Evan stepped toward the center of the room, confidence settling on him like a tailored jacket. He took the microphone with the ease of a man who believed the moment belonged to him. All right, he laughed. "If I can steal everyone's attention for a second." The room turned obediently. He began the way these speeches always do, gratitude, charm, practiced humility. He thanked his parents, Lydia's parents, friends, colleagues. He spoke about love like it was a project with a successful outcome. Lydia stood beside him, radiant, her hand resting on his arm. She looked exactly the way she was supposed to look. And then his eyes found me. The pause was brief, almost unnoticeable, but I felt it. "I also want to thank Lydia's family," he continued, smiling wider, "for raising such an incredible woman." Polite applause followed. "And Naomi," he added, his tone shifting just enough to make the room lean in, "for showing us all that there are many paths in life." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. He chuckled, encouraged by it. "You know, some of us aim high. Others keep things simple." This time, the laughter landed harder. I could feel it pressing against my skin, turning my name into a shared joke. Glasses clinked. Someone snorted. Someone else looked at me with that familiar mix of pity and relief that it wasn't them. Lydia didn't move. She didn't squeeze his hand. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look at me. She smiled politely, eyes fixed forward, as if silence were the safest choice. That was the moment something inside me settled. Not anger, not humiliation. Clarity. I understood then that this wasn't about words or intention. It was about permission. He spoke the way he did because he believed he could. Because the room had agreed, long before tonight, on who I was allowed to be. And I had spent too many years accepting that agreement. The laughter faded. Evan turned back toward the crowd, ready to continue, confident he'd landed the moment exactly as planned. I placed my glass down carefully. The sound was small, almost lost beneath the music. But it was enough. I stood. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just enough to change the shape of the room. The room didn't notice at first. Evan was still smiling, riding the echo of laughter, preparing to move on to the next safe line in his speech. People shifted in their seats, ready to clap again. The moment was supposed to continue without interruption. Then I stepped forward. My heels sounded louder than they should have on the polished floor. Not because they were loud, but because the room was suddenly listening. I walked calmly. No rush. No hesitation. I felt oddly steady, as if my body had been waiting years for this exact distance to close. Evan noticed me when I reached the edge of the stage. Confusion flickered across his face. "I'll take that," I said, gently, reaching for the microphone. He laughed reflexively. "Hey, this is—" "I know," I said. "Just a moment." Something in my voice made him let go. I turned to the room. "My name is Naomi Carter." Silence. Not the polite kind. The kind that arrives when something unexpected has already happened and everyone senses it at the same time. I don't usually introduce myself at events like this, I continued. But since my name has come up tonight, I thought clarity might be helpful. I glanced at Evan, then back to the guests. I'm the founder and majority owner of Carter Holdings. The words landed without force. They didn't need it. Someone inhaled sharply. A chair scraped. A glass tipped over near the bar. The spill ignored. Evan laughed again, too quickly this time. Come on. That's not funny. I agree, I said evenly. Which is why it isn't a joke. I nodded toward the screen behind the stage. It lit up. Corporate filings. Board records. My name repeated in black and white, undeniable in its consistency. I've stayed out of the spotlight by choice, I said. But ownership doesn't disappear just because it's quiet. The room shifted, the energy tilting like a floor losing its level. Evan stared at the screen, then at me, his face draining of color. You never said. You never asked, I replied. The arrogance drained first. Panic followed close behind. I watched it happen in real time. The recalculation, the sudden awareness of everything he had just said, everything he had assumed. Lydia finally turned to me. Her eyes searched my face, not accusing, just stunned. As if she were seeing a familiar outline filled in for the first time. You own it, she whispered. I met her gaze. Yes. The words sat between us, heavy and unavoidable. I turned back to the room. I came tonight to celebrate my sister, I said. I still mean that. But I won't stand in a room where my silence is mistaken for insignificance. I handed the microphone back to Evan. He took it mechanically, as if unsure what to do with his hands. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't smile. I simply stepped away. And for the first time that night, the humiliation changed direction, without a single cruel word spoken. No one told the party it was over. It just stopped knowing what it was. Music continued for a few seconds too long, then faded into something thin and uncertain. Conversations restarted in fragments, half sentences that didn't know where to land. People looked at one another, then away, then back at the screens, as if the truth might rearrange itself if they stared hard enough. Evan remained on the stage, microphone hanging uselessly at his side. Someone from his team approached him, speaking in a low voice that carried just enough panic to be unmistakable. Another followed, then another. The confidence that had wrapped around him earlier unraveled thread by thread. Lydia's future in-laws stood frozen near their table, smiles gone, posture stiff. Her mother stared at me like I had rewritten a rule she didn't know existed. Her father avoided my gaze entirely. A few coworkers nodded at me as I passed, uncertain whether acknowledgement was safe now. Others pretended not to see me at all. The staff moved carefully, professionalism holding where celebration no longer could. I didn't wait for instructions. I set my glass on the nearest table, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the exit. No applause followed, and oh gasps, just the quiet awareness that something permanent had shifted. Behind me, I heard Evan's voice crack, not in anger, but confusion. Questions tumbling over one another. Reassurances that sounded increasingly hollow. By the time I reached the doors, someone was already on the phone. Then another. News doesn't travel loudly at first. It spreads in whispers, in forwarded messages, in sudden calendar invites marked urgent. Outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Honest. I paused only once, long enough to take a breath that wasn't weighted by expectation. By morning, the office would know. Not everything, but enough. Titles would be re-examined. Assumptions revisited. Careers quietly rerouted. And Evan? He would spend the next days explaining himself in rooms where his words no longer carried weight. Confidence, once broken, is expensive to rebuild. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. Not with them. With the version of myself that stayed silent to be tolerated. As I walked away, my phone buzzed for the first time that night. A message from someone high up in the company. Brief. Professional. We need to talk. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding. There would be time. Tonight had already said enough. She called the next morning. Not immediately. Not in a panic. The way Lydia did everything, carefully timed, composed, as if emotions were something to be scheduled once the rest of life was handled. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Hi, she said. The words sounded unfamiliar on her. Smaller. We didn't talk about the party at first. She asked if I'd gotten home safely. I said I had. She said she hadn't slept. I believed her. Finally, she exhaled. I didn't know, she said, about any of it. I know, I replied. There was a long pause on the line. I could hear her breathing, uneven now. That doesn't feel like enough, she said. But it's the truth. I'm not asking for more, I said. I'm asking for honesty. That seemed to unsteady her more than anger would have. She admitted things slowly, like stepping into cold water. That she'd always assumed I was fine. That my silence made it easy to forget I needed anything. That somewhere along the way, she'd stopped looking closely because she didn't like what comparison might reveal. I was afraid, she said finally, of what it would mean if you were more. The word landed between us. I told her about the years she hadn't seen. The rooms I worked in alone. The nights I learned to trust myself because no one else would. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't soften it either. I didn't hide my life to make you small, I said. I hid it because I didn't want my worth to become a negotiation. She was quiet. When she spoke again, her voice broke, not theatrically but honestly. I should have protected you, she said. Last night. Always. Yes, I said. You should have. There was relief in saying it. Not because it hurt her, but because it was true. I'm not ready to forgive everything, I continued. And I don't need an apology that tries to rush us past what happened. Another pause. What do you want then? She asked. I want us to stop pretending silence didn't cost anything, I said. And I want you to see me, without shrinking me or elevating yourself to make sense of it. She whispered my name. Not the way people do when they need something, but the way you say a name when you finally understand it belongs to someone real. We didn't fix everything, but we named it. And that, I had learned, was how healing actually began. 3 months passed. Time didn't soften what happened, it clarified it. The company settled into its new shape quietly, the way it always did after a necessary correction. Titles shifted. Reporting lines adjusted. People recalibrated their understanding of who held influence and why. There were no announcements about me, no sudden spotlight. I didn't want one. Control, I'd learned, didn't require visibility. Life returned to its steady rhythm. Early mornings. Long meetings. Decisions that affected people I would never meet. I walked through hallways where conversations paused, not out of fear, but awareness. The difference mattered. Lydia and I spoke occasionally. Carefully. Without pretending we were further along than we were. Honesty had made room for something new, even if trust was still finding its footing. One afternoon, during a quarterly strategy session at headquarters, I noticed her. She sat near the far end of the table, posture too straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. Young. Smart. Out of place in a way I recognized immediately. When she spoke, her voice was clear, but the room didn't lean in. Someone interrupted her. Another person summarized her point, as if it needed translation. I watched the familiar pattern form. Dismissal doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. During a break, I walked over and asked her name. Claire, she said, surprised. I asked her to repeat her idea, slowly this time. I let her finish, without interruption. Then I turned back to the room and said, that's the direction we're moving in. No drama, an lecture. Just acknowledgement. The shift was immediate. Heads nodded. Pens moved. The idea was suddenly viable because someone with authority had allowed it to be. After the meeting, Claire approached me, eyes bright and uncertain. Thank you, she said quietly. I smiled. Don't thank me. Keep speaking. She nodded, as if storing the permission somewhere safe. Later that evening, alone in my office, I stood by the window and watched the city settle into itself. Lights flickered on in buildings I didn't own, decisions made by people I'd never meet. The world moved forward without asking who deserved to be seen. I thought about that night. The laughter, the assumptions, the silence that had once felt like safety. Silence can be protection, but it can also be a mirror. Power doesn't need to announce itself to be real. It doesn't need applause or recognition or validation from rooms that were never built to understand it. I had learned how to own space without occupying it loudly, how to change outcomes without raising my voice, how to stand fully in myself without asking permission. They humiliated me because they thought I was invisible. And I learned something important that night. Visibility is optional when you already own the ground beneath them. Before you go, tell us, how would you rate this story from 0 to 10? Your voice matters here. And where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments and help us grow a global circle built on kindness, love, and second chances. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it too. Every share, every subscription brings us closer to our 1K family and helps us keep telling stories of resilience, healing, and Black excellence. Thank you for being here. Truly, this journey is richer because of you.